Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun and continued and ended in thee we may glorify thy holy name, and finally by thy mercy attain everlasting life. Amen. Before introductions, I'd just like to welcome all our guests here today. It's good to see school classes and other people that come to watch the proceedings. I'd just like to caution you not to take part in the proceedings, no clapping or talking or shouting or taking photos or videos. So welcome and thank you. Introduction of guests. The member from Cut Knife Turtleford.
I ask leave for an extended introduction, Mr. Speaker.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to welcome 35 amazing grade 9 students in the West Gallery from Maidstone High School. They are accompanied here today with their teachers, Natasha Wicks, Brad Lejeune, Rhonda Kimmage, and Michelle Lundquist. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm very much looking forward to meeting with them after question period and listening to the kind of questions they're going to have after they've watched question period. I would ask that all members of this Assembly join me in welcoming these bright and bright students to their Legislative Assembly. And while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure today to introduce in your gallery my parents, Louis and Sharon Dobiter. Mr. Speaker, my parents are retired and live in Humboldt, where I was raised for the better part of my child and adolescent life. I'm excited that they got to make the trip down and join us here today. It's been some time since my parents have been to this beautiful building, Mr. Speaker, but it's a very familiar place to them, as my father served as the MLA for the Humboldt constituency from 1982 to 1986, as well as being the former Minister of Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, quite often we talk about how important it is to have our families support us in these roles and what they have to put up with while we work for our constituents and be away from home to serve in this Assembly. And it's an honor to be able to recognize the people that helped shape us and turn us into the individuals that we are today. My upbringing was spending countless hours on my dad's farm and helping out, which I believe was where I obtained most of my work ethics from. My mother played no small role in my upbringing, as she was a school teacher for many years, but then switched careers to work at the Humboldt Journal, providing editorial review before retiring. During my adolescent teens, I'm sure it was the school teacher coming out in her as she was trying to keep me in line with my school studies. but much to her chagrin, I seem to have had a lot of fun during those times, and I'm probably responsible for some of the gray hairs that are left behind. All fun aside, it is only with the guidance from our parents that assisted us in developing our leadership skills that we have today, along with the support that we receive from our spouses and our children, which allows us to fulfill our roles in this Assembly and within our constituencies. And on that note, I just want to say thank you for the love and direction you've given me over the years, as well as the guidance you've provided me with, and I would ask that all members of this Assembly join me in welcoming my parents, Louis and Sharon, to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed a pleasure of mine to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly one of my daughters. Shannon Harper is here today. Give us a wave, as well as a number of her colleagues from work and a friend and a past colleague from work at Scotland and Lease. So give us a wave when I introduce you. We have Sean Kozak. We have Lisa McGilvray, Tara Wallace, Ariane Graham, Matt Powell, and Matt's daughter, Blake. Blake was here a couple weeks ago, apparently, with her class, and she got to meet with the Minister of Corrections and Policing, and she liked it so much that she wanted to come again because I promised her that she gets to meet the Premier afterwards, and she thought that was pretty special. So with that, we're looking forward to taking her to meet the Premier, and I had time to spend with these individuals and show them my office and my boardroom earlier, and I want all members to welcome them to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I am pleased to introduce a Legislative Assembly seated in your gallery, the Colida family from Fort Qu'Appelle. Mr. Speaker, if they could give us a wave. Catherine is the Hospital of Regina Foundation's Pediatric Ambassador. She is joined here today by her mother, Carolyn, and her younger sister, Vivian. Catherine began her charitable journey at the age of 5 years old when she created Catherine's Cause. What began as an organized cleanup of their hometown park, over time gradually grew into the fundraising of the neonatal intensive care unit at the Regina General Hospital, and so much more, Mr. Speaker. Catherine's little sister, Vivian, has been an avid supporter of the work that Catherine has done and has joined her with her sister's efforts. Catherine and Vivian worked together this year to raise funds for the Z99 Radio Marathon, and the two sisters donated over $70,000, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Not only that, Mr. Speaker, other causes have received their generous support in recent years, including the Canadian Mental Health Association Saskatchewan Division, Souls Harbour, the Regina Food Bank, the Regina Humane Society, and the Regina Cat Rescue. We are very lucky to have such strong young people giving back to Saskatchewan. I'm very pleased to be introducing them and highlighting them in their achievements in the House today. I also see that Dino Sophocleus, the President and CEO of the Hospital of Regina Foundation, is seated in your gallery, Mr. Speaker. Our government has a very positive relationship with Dino and his team over at the Foundation. I'm very thankful for the work in the Foundation that does the work for Regina and Southern Saskatchewan residents to have access to the necessary care and support what they need. I ask all members to welcome Catherine, Vivian, Carolyn, and Dino to their Legislative Assembly. And Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I'd like to introduce, seated in the West Gallery, Michael and Bonnie Kyogan. If they could give us a wave. Seated with Mike and Bonnie are someone who's no stranger to this Assembly, their son, and my soon-to-be former Chief of Staff, David. I'll have to have words with the Minister of CIC later. David's parents recently retired after 10 years of owning and operating Mike's, your independent grocer on Broadway Avenue here in Regina. Now that the weather is improving, I'm told that Mike looks forward to spending more time on the golf course this summer, and Bonnie is also looking forward to a restful summer but plans to take on part-time work in the curling rink to keep herself busy this fall. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members congratulate Mike and Bonnie on their recent retirement and welcome the Keogan family to their Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in with the minister in welcoming these guests to their Legislative Assembly today. The Okalita family, in particular Catherine, who is the pediatric ambassador and was also nominated for a Women of Distinction Award. So congratulations on that as well, Catherine. And as well, welcome to Dino. I look forward to our reception later this afternoon, where we'll hear more about what the hospital foundations have been up to in Saskatchewan. I want to thank you all for your work, for your advocacy, and as well as the important fundraising efforts that support our health efforts in the province. So I would ask all members to join me in welcoming these guests to their assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Government Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to join with the Minister of Health and the opposition critic and welcome both Catherine and Vivian to their Legislative Assembly. It's not the first time they've been here, especially Catherine has been here a couple times before, but always a privilege to have people from your constituency, but people from Fort Qu'Appelle that have given so much back, not only to their community, but to their province. One of the things I've found very interesting, Catherine raised quite a bit of money for the playground equipment that goes in the school, around the school, and she's homeschooled. Never took advantage of it. Well, she did, I think, probably off hours, but just really proud to represent Fort Qu'Appelle with such great people like yourselves. I was able to nominate Catherine for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Medal, Mr. Speaker, probably one of the youngest recipients of that medal. She does great work, and only now will get better with her sister Vivian helping her out. So thank you very much for all you do for the Fort Qu'Appelle area.
Recognize a member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to join in the well wishes to Bonnie and Michael Keogan that are with us here today. These are strong local business owners, Mr. Speaker. They ran a very nice grocery store, Mike's Independent, Mr. Speaker. I know my wife Stephanie, she teaches a little bit out to the over there to the east side a bit, so she was a regular customer there and always sang their praises, Mr. Speaker. And also to David, it's wonderful to see that he's finally got that long-awaited shift in government over there, Mr. Speaker. He's an old Tom Collegiate graduate, and I think he's just a wonderful, thoughtful guy, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you. Today is Correctional Services Appreciation Day. Today is a day to honour the hardworking men and women who work within our correctional centres across the province. Every correctional worker in Saskatchewan plays a pivotal role in protecting public safety by helping offenders gain education, employment skills, and knowledge about their culture. They protect offenders from harming others and harming themselves and provide care that perhaps they wouldn't have received otherwise. I had the privilege this morning to celebrate with representatives from across the province who work in our correctional services, as well as to award the Minister's Award for Excellence. I want to recognize all corrections representatives here with us today in your gallery who made the trip down to Regina from across the province. Thank you for the work that you all do in your respective centres. I also want to introduce a few special representatives from Paul Dojak Youth Centre Cultural Camp team who were the chosen recipients for this year's Minister's Award for Excellence. Bill Stevenson, please wave. Crystal Wolbaum and Michelle Pine. I would also like to acknowledge the team members who could not be with us today. Ray Adiger, Muna DeSimon, Tanner Exner, Carmi Gallagher, Brett Friday, and Keegan MacArthur. I want to thank all of you here today and all the correctional workers from across the province for playing a pivotal role in protecting public safety. Your efforts collectively benefit everyone who lives in this great province. Thank you again for your service and welcome to your assembly.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the minister opposite in welcoming and congratulating all of these correctional service workers to their Legislative Assembly on this, the Correctional Services Appreciation Day. First of all, thank you so much for all the work that you and all correctional officers, all correctional service workers do every single day for this province in your respective facilities. I know oftentimes it may feel that it goes unnoticed, but it's incredibly, incredibly important. And thank you so much for all the work that you do. I also want to take this opportunity to highlight in particular the cultural camp team from Dojak Centre. Myself and several of my colleagues on this side of the House had the opportunity, absolute pleasure of visiting cultural camp a little while ago while camp was going on. It was an absolutely inspiring and incredible program, an opportunity for us to see your work in action and really see the impact that it was having in those kids, and hearing about their stories and what that impact was to them was very heartwarming to all of us. So thank you so much for that, and to all of you, again, just a heartfelt thank you for all the work that you do every single day. And once again, I ask all members to join me in welcoming them to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to request leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a group of visitors seated in your gallery this afternoon. We have with us today 11 articling students who are working with the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General and at courts across Saskatchewan, coming to the end of their tenure. So if you can give a wave. Kenya Bimji is currently working for the ministry in Regina as a student at law. After articling, she will be working for the federal government with public prosecutions in Ottawa, I'm assuming. Katerina Kostya is also articling with the ministry. She will be practicing with Durand Rath Johnson LLP once she is called to the bar. Lexi Morish is articling with the ministry as well. Lexi plans to stay with the ministry and work in the Child Protection Branch. And Mr. Speaker, we are delighted to have her. Savannah Downs, Mr. Speaker, is also articling with the ministry in the Office of Public Guardian and Trustee for the month of May. Savannah has also made the excellent choice to join the ministry once she joins the bar in the Constitutional Law Branch. There's not a lot going on there. Emily Arthur, Mr. Speaker, is currently articling at the Court of King's Bench. She did her secondments at Legal Aid Regina and the Department of Justice Canada. When she returns from an overseas trip that she's planning, she'll be working with the Federal Department of Justice in Saskatoon. Taylor Morose is articling at the Court of King's Bench in Regina. After he completes his articling, he plans to practice law in Saskatoon. Mr. Speaker, Corbin Golding is currently clerking at the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan, and after completing articling, he plans to clerk at the Supreme Court of Canada. Julie Lebac is currently articling at the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan. After completing her articling, she plans to take a year to focus on her track and field pursuits, which she's very serious about, before returning to full-time legal work. Jason McNiven is articling at the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. Once he's called to the bar, he plans to practice at the Vancouver office of MLT Aikens. Callie Schwartz is currently clerking at the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan. Upon completing her articles, she will be taking a position in civil litigation at MLT Aikens in Regina. And finally, Mr. Speaker, Stephanie Pankiw, who is articling at the Provincial Court of Saskatchewan. These students are joined today by Teresia Cooper from the Ministry of Justice and Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, we're very pleased to host them today and to have attracted several to the ministry and are always on the lookout for more. Please join me in welcoming this accomplished group to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to join with the Minister and rise today in welcoming this incredible and distinguished group of articling students in the conclusion of their articling year to their Legislative Assembly. Thank you so much for those who've chosen to stay, for choosing Saskatchewan as your place of practice. I hope that those the few that are going away will ultimately make their way back here again. It's an incredible bar to be a part of. It's a very friendly, very wonderful place to work. I know I am biased, and I know this isn't always a popular statement in this House, but I know some do agree that the more lawyers we have in this chamber, the better, Mr. Speaker. So we're always happy to have articling students and clerks here as well. Again, thank you so much for your service so far to this province, and we do hope that you enjoy a long and very distinguished career. I know you will. For those who I've already had the opportunity to meet and those I'm looking forward to meeting in the future, again, welcome and thank you for being here today.
You're here. Recognize a member from Saskatoon Riversdale.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, Mr. Speaker, it is my great pleasure to introduce a couple of constituents from my riding, Cliff and Irene Arthurs, if you could give us a wave. We had a chance to chat a little bit over lunch and found out that one of my friends, their son, I had no idea it was their son, Mr. Speaker, but we've been friends for about 25 years and we just had a great chat. They are very active in the Holiday Park community, as well as with St. John Bosco Church, Mr. Speaker, and their children and grandchildren actually went to the school that I mentor, so St. John School. And just a great pleasure for you guys to be here today, and I really appreciate you coming, and hope you enjoy question period and the rest of your afternoon. With Cliff and Irene, Mr. Speaker, are Shelley Janostin and her mother, Nydia. Now, Nydia and I actually sit on the Meewasin board together. So welcome to your legislature today. I'd ask all members to join me in welcoming them to their legislative center. While I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I forgot to let the minister know. It is also my great pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to introduce Sean Tuck in your gallery. Sean and I have known each other, I think we figured out a little over 40 years. I met his parents, knew them quite well in the church that we went to for years, Mr. Speaker. And so Sean and I became pretty close over those years, as well as his siblings and actually his wife and his wife's family. So they were here with the Trucking Association group yesterday and got a chance to spend a little bit of time, have some dinner, so really appreciate it. It's my pleasure to introduce you today, Sean. And with Sean is Jim Young, who I've known for a number of years as well, and got a chance to chat with them as well yesterday, and Scott Bazinski, who I just met, but had a great evening last night with these gentlemen. So to you and through you, Mr. Speaker, and to all members, please help me welcoming them to the Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the member and welcome both Shelley and Nadia Probin to the Legislative Assembly. You know, in Saskatchewan, we talk about 6 degrees of separation. I had an opportunity to meet Shelley Janostin when she was Chief of Staff in the building. And she introduced me to her mother, Nadia Probin. Turns out, Nadia happened to share with me that she was a teacher and that when she started her career, she started out in Hafford. Well, my oldest sister, Arlene, started out teaching in Hafford, found out that, in fact, they started their teaching careers together. So in Saskatchewan, it's 6 degrees of separation because you never know who you're going to meet and the kind of close relationship you end up developing. Shelley and Nadia have become very close friends of our family, and Shelley and her husband Mike come down every Labor Day and we make sauerkraut. That's our idea of Labor Day. So I just want to welcome both Shelley and Nadia to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from West Mountain, Touchwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to introduce Shell School Grade 8 class from Holdfast. They're here today. Give a wave, guys. They are joined by their teacher, Michaela Farrell, and parent chaperones Daniel Dennis and Emily Fawson. It's important to note, Mr. Speaker, that this school is located in the constituency of Arm River, represented by the Minister of Environment, but he is currently away on government business, and I am filling in for him. You can't do that. It's also important to note that the minister's mother attended this school, and she's probably watching, so I better do a very good job today. So please join me in welcoming Shell School to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to join with my colleague from Douglas Park and the Minister for Justice in welcoming one of these articling students who's up there. Couldn't see her from where I was seated, but Julie LeBach. I had the honor of teaching Julie early in my career as a public school teacher at Aidan Bowman Collegiate. I taught, I think it was English 10. It was a long time ago, but she's just a brilliant student at the time. It is no surprise to anyone who's worked with Julie in a school setting that she'll continue to do great things for this province, for the people of Saskatchewan. I've had the honor of watching her track career as she went on to compete with the U of S Huskies, and I believe that she was the U Sports Female Track Athlete of the Year at least 1 year, if not more. She's got a distinguished career. The sky's the limit with this individual, and happy to see her here and welcome her to her Legislative Assembly.
You're here.
Presenting petitions, I recognize a member from Last Mount Touchwood.
We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. That the NDP Liberal federal tax on carbon continues to make life more expensive for Saskatchewan residents. That the federal Liberal NDP coalition government continues to be disingenuous with their rhetoric surrounding the carbon tax, and that according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's analysis, quote, most households will pay more in fuel charges and GST, as well as receiving slightly lower incomes than they will receive in climate action incentive payments, end quote. Despite promises from the federal government that the tax would remain revenue neutral and that families would benefit, the reality is that families are paying more than they receive. We in the prayer reads as follows: respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To call upon the Government of Canada to immediately end the federal carbon tax and support Saskatchewan's development as a global supplier of food, fuel, and fertilizer. The below undersigned are residents of Regina and Balgony. I do so submit, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to present a petition calling for recruitment and retention of pediatric specialists. These citizens wish to bring to our attention that Saskatchewan's sole practicing pediatric GI has announced her intention to close her practice this year and leave the province. The parents of pediatric GI patients will have to leave the province to get medical care for their child. That Saskatchewan has an insufficient number of pediatric specialists in other fields, including neurologists, immunologists, adolescent medicine, and ENTs, and that Saskatchewan children requiring specialized care are not receiving the medical treatment they need. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately recruit an appropriate complement of pediatric GI specialists and adjunct services and develop a plan to address the service gaps in pediatric specialty fields. This is signed by individuals in Regina today, Mr. Speaker. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be on my feet to present this petition calling for adequate funding for education, just as I have every day since thousands of people gathered on these steps to raise these same issues. Those who signed the petition today would like the Assembly to be aware that education funding included in this year's budget is wholly inadequate and will lead to cuts in the classroom again. The Saskatchewan School Boards Association, who represent 27 public and Catholic divisions in a nonpartisan way, have harshly criticized this budget, stating that it will further erode public education in our province. Teachers have also had lots to say, and after Budget Day, they described this government's response as completely baffling. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that this year's cuts in the classroom come on top of years of cuts, and our school divisions describe a system that's already cut down to the bone. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to provide adequate, sustainable and predictable operating funds for our 27 public and separate school divisions to ensure that schools, teachers and other caring professionals are able to meet the needs of every student in Saskatchewan. Those who signed the petition today are from Swift Current. I do so present.
Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm on my feet again today, as I have been for much of this session, presenting a petition calling on the Government of Saskatchewan to join municipalities and provinces across Canada and codify a ban on conversion therapy.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, conversion therapy or reparative therapy is a discredited and abusive practice that is opposed by psychiatric and psychological organizations across North America and the world. The practice can lead to lifelong trauma and is in direct contravention of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. The undersigned demand action on this file and demand criminal code reform concerning the practice of conversion therapy. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan is an outlier on this. There is simply no place in our society for this prejudiced practice. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to ban the practice of conversion therapy and prohibit transportation of youth and adults outside the province for such purposes. Mr. Speaker, the signatories today reside in Tisdale. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to the Legislative Assembly calling for the funding of in vitro fertilization treatments here in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, we know that 1 in 6 couples in Canada experience infertility. Mr. Speaker, I recently saw this described by a friend of mine as her greatest heartbreak. This is government, Mr. Speaker, that's sitting on billions in windfall revenue, and we know that IVF treatments are prohibitively expensive, with one cycle typically costing upwards of $10,000. Mr. Speaker, other provinces have created programs that financially assist in providing fertility treatments to those struggling to conceive, and investing in people determined to grow their families here in Saskatchewan is the right thing to do, and it makes economic sense, Mr. Speaker. It is truly growth that works for everyone. I will read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Government of Saskatchewan immediately move to cover the financial burden of 2 rounds of IVF treatment for Saskatchewan people experiencing infertility. Mr. Speaker, the signatories of this petition today reside in Weyburn and Unger. I do so present.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm on my feet to again present a petition calling on this government to provide adequate and equitable SED rates. For years, Mr. Speaker, folks on the SED program were told times are tough and we can't increase amounts, 8 years to be exact. Then, with the crushing cost of living and over $1 billion in windfall revenue, hopes were high for this 2023 budget. Instead, folks got $1 a day. That's a 2% increase after 8 years with no increase, which represented an overall 20% reduction in benefits. Let's not forget this is a program for folks with significant and enduring disabilities with barriers to employment. What a shame, Mr. Speaker. With that, I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to 1. Increase SED rates to account for inflation, 2. Respect the constitutional rights of persons with disability in Saskatchewan by halting their discriminatory clawback policies, index SED rates going forward, and finally, provide targeted relief to those in deepest poverty, namely single individuals paying market rent. The signatories of this petition reside in Regina and Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to present our petition calling for universal access to birth control for all Saskatchewan people. The undersigned residents would like to bring to our attention the following: that Saskatchewan has some of the highest rates of adolescent pregnancy in the entire country. That's youth ages 12 to 20 years old. That cost is one of the biggest barriers to accessing contraceptive birth control in Saskatchewan, particularly among adolescents. That having consistent and affordable access to contraceptive options is essential for promoting bodily autonomy, preventing unwanted pregnancy, and saving money on sexual and reproductive health care. And finally, that sexual and reproductive health and rights are human rights. Mr. Speaker, we had medical students join us here in the legislature 3 weeks ago tomorrow, and I know that they met with the health minister, and I hope that he's been following up with those students since that time, and we'll see action on this front. I'll now read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to adopt a policy making no-cost prescription contraceptive available to all Saskatchewan people. The signatories today, Mr. Speaker, reside in Grenfell, Indian Head, and Wolseley. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize a member from Moose Jaw North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's another great day in the city of Moose Jaw. Last week, the 800 CHAB Family First Radiothon was held for the 17th year. Raising money for the Moose Jaw Health Foundation, the goal of this year's event was to raise $150,000. After 36 hours on the air, the Radiothon had raised a grand total of $592,533. Mr. Speaker, those funds will now be used to purchase state-of-the-art equipment at the Dr. F.H. Wigmore Regional Hospital. Equipment that includes a specialized critical care bed, a glide scope, an ultrasound probe, and a quick-thaw plasma system. Local physician Dr. Caitlin Howe explained how this new equipment will benefit our local residents. She said, quote, "To be able to provide that elevated level of care to people really does change their outcomes, and it allows them to stay close to home without having to be transferred every time they might need that little extra bit of support," end quote. Mr. Speaker, when you add up all the donations raised over the past 17 years, the Family First Radiothon has now raised more than $5.4 million for the Moose Jaw Health Foundation. I would ask all members to join me in thanking the people of Moose Jaw and surrounding communities for their many years of generous support and for all the great work being done by the Moose Jaw Health Foundation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Utana.
Mr. Speaker, the Meewasin Valley Authority plays a key role in the daily lives of the constituents of Saskatoon, Utana, and beyond. Recently, the Meewasin Valley Authority announced that trail usage for 2022 was over 2.3 million visits. We should all be very proud of this amazing organization that stewards and maintains such an important asset for quality of life and a major economic and environmental driver for our province. In addition, more travelers than ever are looking to sustainable vacations with access to quality nature trails, with Meewasin being a strong attraction for visitors as well. Usage of the trail is up 40% from what it was in 2019. Trail usage increased during the early days of the pandemic and continues to play an important part not only in the lives of Saskatoon residents, but also as a driver for tourism in Saskatoon. I'm very proud to support the work of the MVA throughout the year in its many community activities. A huge thank you to the Meewasin Valley, their staff, and volunteers who continue to make sure the South Saskatchewan Riverbank and other conservation areas under their authority are maintained for all to enjoy.
Recognize a member from Kootenai, Courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 constituents of mine received Saskatchewan Baseball Hall of Fame inductions in the individual category this past August. Congratulations to Kelvin Collier from Meota, Roger Blackyer from Edam, and Marianne Gates from Unity. Kelvin Collier dedicated hours on the baseball diamond umping games. From the year 2000 to present day, Kelvin serves as the league commissioner for the North Saskatchewan River Baseball League and umpired in the same league from 1985 to 2022. Kelvin says there's no better place to be on a summer night than on the ball diamond in Saskatchewan. Roger Blackyer not only played baseball himself, but also has dedicated his time towards coaching and umpiring baseball over the years. Roger says, do all the little things right and big things will happen. On the field, play to win, respect your opponents, and tip your hat when you lose. Marianne Gates has spent 51 years volunteering scorekeeping baseball and softball games in her community. Marianne says the biggest benefit of scorekeeping is having the best seat in the house for each game and just enjoying the hometown team pride. In 1 year, Marianne averages 186 hours in the scorekeeper's booth. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all members of this Assembly join me in congratulating Kelvin, Roger, and Marianne on their induction into the Saskatchewan Baseball Hall of Fame. Thank you for your great contributions to baseball heritage in Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise today to recognize the opening of Pine Lodge Addiction Recovery Program in my constituency of Regina Elphinstone Centre. In June 2022, Pine Lodge opened near 8th Avenue in Elphinstone, aiming to help people across the province with substance use disorder. I had the great privilege of touring the facility a few weeks back. Pine Lodge operates from a client-centered, trauma-informed model of care. It has nurtured relationships with community-based organizations across the province to offer a high-quality continuum of care. Pine Lodge offers a substance-free live-in environment with clients benefit from individualized case planning, Mr. Speaker, that put them at the centre of a plan that is realistic and has regard to what will be available to them in their home community. Their transition planning helps individuals develop the necessary skills and resources to maintain sobriety and prevent and address relapse as they transition from treatment to their home or community. The dedication and hard work of the team behind this project has resulted in much-needed resources that will help to break the cycle of addiction and support the health and wellness of our community. Executive Director Andy Love and the staff at Pine Lodge are bringing hope to so many individuals and families who struggle with substance use disorder. Recognizing the need for a community hub, Andrew has prioritized a barrier-free interdisciplinary approach. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in congratulating and celebrating Pine Lodge in their opening and the dedicated work they do in our community.
Recognize a member from Cypress Hills.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about a young man with courage, strong will, and determination. On December 30th, Sandy Cooper Black, a 16-year-old cowboy from the council area, was involved in a rodeo accident in Brooks, Alberta. The outcome wasn't in Sandy's favor. Doctors believed that Sandy would have a 5% chance in breathing on his own, and the damage to his spinal column would pretty well all but limit his arms and legs movement. Mr. Speaker, doctors did not know Sandy and did not know the support that Sandy had behind him. Mr. Speaker, today Sandy is breathing on his own and he has movement in his hands and arms and legs. Sandy Cooper Black family are not alone in this journey to recovery. The communities of Reno, Council, Maple Creek stepped up right away to help the families in the time of need. Mr. Speaker, it started when families from Coulter, when family friend Coulter Wall announced all the proceeds from his new album would be put to assist Sandy's recovery. The community of Maple Creek hosted a hockey game which raised $100,000 and a GoFundMe page at this present time that's $120,000 to Sandy's recovery. Wow. Mr. Speaker, this is another example of how Saskatchewan people get behind their friends and neighbours. Mr. Speaker, I ask all the members to join me wishing Sandy a speedy recovery and thank those for supporting Sandy and his family as time goes forward. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Regina Northeast. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about the return of the Mosaic Festival after a 3-year pause. Mosaic, a festival of cultures, is one of the biggest multicultural festivals in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, I have personally been involved in various roles for the India Pavilion as a volunteer in this fun-filled and educational festival for many years. It is truly wonderful celebration of our province's multiculturalism, showcasing each country's culture in its own unique pavilion. Each pavilion is an immersive experience into that country's music, dance, cuisine, fashion, art, and trades, capturing the distinct energy and identity of the countries they represent. There are already 17 pavilions confirmed to represent their distinct traditions from across the world. This year's mosaic will also include the return of free transportation that allows people to easily travel from pavilion to pavilion. This tried and true model has made Mosaic the cultural event of summers past. The festival started in 1967 and was held each year until 2020, when health concerns related to COVID-19 put the event on hold. This year's much-anticipated return will bring a great opportunity for our constituents to celebrate Regina's rich cultural heritage. Thanks to the Regina Multicultural Council and all the volunteers for their hard work year after year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognized member from Carrot River Valley. Mr. Speaker, the NDP claim they oppose the carbon tax, but the member from Newtown supports it. The NDP say they support municipalities being able to allow alcohol consumption in parks, but the member from Newtown is against it. The NDP voted in favour of our firearms legislation, but the member for Newtown now opposes that too. And here's one more interesting statement she made that requires some clarification. On April the 4th, she called for the legalization of currently illegal drugs. The member said, and I quote, "In a similar context of harm reduction, you will see the merits of why it's necessary to legalize and ensure that we are addressing a toxic drug supply here in Saskatchewan that remain unregulated and within the criminal domain." End quote. So, just to recap, that member is against toxic positivity, but she wants to legalize toxic drugs. Mr. Speaker, I think Saskatchewan people deserve some clarity on the NDP's position. Will the NDP leader be crystal clear and stand in this House and tell us exactly which illegal toxic drugs they want to legalize? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question period to recognize the leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver when it comes to the cost of living. That's right. Despite a generational cost of living crisis and the fact that they're sitting on windfall revenues, this government failed to provide any relief to those struggling. Mr. Speaker, why did the Premier fail to provide any relief at all in his budget to those struggling with the cost of living?
Recognize the Premier.
I've said many times on the floor of this Assembly, in the rotunda, the Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier as well, Mr. Speaker, this budget, as every budget in the province of Saskatchewan over the last number of years, has just over $2 billion that are there to address affordability, there to address cost of living pressures, to the level, Mr. Speaker, that a family of four in this province making a household income of about $75,000 today, $5,000 in tax under the members opposite when they had the honour of serving government, less than $2,000 in tax by this current government. Mr. Speaker, another example was just the other evening in committee. Mr. Speaker, one of the largest tax incentives for students that are transitioning to a career in this province, in a community in this province, Mr. Speaker, are able to make a claim under the graduate retention program. Mr. Speaker, indicated by the member at committee the other night that they would do away with the graduate retention program, Mr. Speaker. Likely the largest tax incentive to someone starting their career, attracting them to live in a community in this province, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, back in 2017, as a part of the largest tax hike in the history of this province, this government expanded the PST to include prepared meals and, quote, snacks. But when you look at the list published, Mr. Speaker, of the things that they call snacks, you will find a list of things that most people in this province would call groceries. Right. Rotisserie chickens, right. Ready-to-make salads and fruit bars, Mr. Speaker, that people put in their kids' lunches. Right. All of these grocery basics are now subject to that Saskatchewan Party food tax. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Premier give families a break and scrap his tax on groceries?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that they still want to debate a budget from 6 years ago, and there's been an election since then. But however, Mr. Speaker, I fully recognize that the cost of food is inflated right now, and that is a pressure on families. So when the decisions was made in the 2017 budget, and there's a number of reasons that we have stated in this House as to why we made those difficult decisions, we used the federal government definition on what is snack food. That then helps with the retailers, confusion among the retailers. So it's the same definition on what qualifies as snack food that the federal government used, supported by the members opposite. They, quite frankly, it is their leader, Jagmeet Singh, that's keeping the federal government in power. Other provinces that have harmonized tax, and by the way, the PST component of that harmonized tax is more than our PST, is also applied to those same criteria list.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
So I guess they're hauling water for the feds now, Mr. Speaker. But there's no reason. There's frankly no reason to be charging this tax on groceries, especially while they sit on windfall revenue, and especially while families, seniors in this province, are facing a generational cost of living crisis, Mr. Speaker. But for a minister who shows a I don't care attitude after an $8,000 flight that should have been a 4-hour car ride, Mr. Speaker, perhaps that shouldn't be surprising. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's not just families. It's food companies as well who have responded to this increased cost by reducing the amount of food in the packages. Mr. Speaker, with fewer items per box, that actually makes those food items subject to the PST. A box of cereal bars, Mr. Speaker, 6, no tax. A box fewer than 6, Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party tax on groceries. It makes no sense. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Premier scrap the tax today?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, again, I'm going to say it is to help the retailers from confusion. We use the same definition that the federal government uses as to what they qualifies to be snack food. So we're not carrying the water for the federal government. We're helping for the confusion with the retailers, Mr. Speaker. But to say that there is no affordability measures in our budget is simply dead wrong, Mr. Speaker. It has been put into the record numerous times, and what they do not want to mention is the $500 affordability tax credit that this government gave for a family of 4 with 2 adults. That is $1,000, which is way more than double what that member opposite promised to do should they be government, and they never will.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I guess the federal government made them do it. That's the defense over there now. But, Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, here in Saskatchewan, families are cutting back at the grocery store and trying to cope with the rising cost of groceries, the rising cost of living. Instead of grabbing a half a dozen muffins at the bakery that would be PST exempt, many families, often seniors, are looking at smaller purchases which are subject to the PST, Mr. Speaker. Again, it makes no sense. The minister acts like this is news to her, Mr. Speaker. Why is this tired and out-of-touch government forcing families to pay PST on items that they need at the grocery store?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I did address the answer to that question when we made the difficult decision 6 years ago in order to have a very stable base of revenue in which to pay for healthcare, education, and social safety nets within our province, services that the citizens of our province expect and should receive, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker. We used the federal government criteria on what qualifies to be snack food. The member opposite knows the vast majority of groceries are not subjected to PST, nor are they subjected, quite frankly, to GST, Mr. Speaker. What we did do, aside from the affordability tax credit, Mr. Speaker, is we have the active families benefit, benefit that was introduced by our government. The NDP never had that. We introduced the Children's Drug Plan to help those same families with the cost of prescription drugs. We have the first-time home buyers tax credit, the only government to have one, and we have $10 a day daycare.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, tell me you're out of touch without telling me you're out of touch, Mr. Speaker. No, it was wrong for the feds to impose the tax on these food items, but it was clearly wrong for that province to follow suit. It makes no sense for the Sask Party to tax basic foods. Every day in this province, working parents stop in to a grocery store to grab something like a hot rotisserie chicken to help put a good, healthy meal on their table for their family, often on the fly between activities or shifts. But because of this tired and out-of-touch government, they're now paying the PST on that meal. An uncooked chicken? Well, it's not taxed. But a cooked rotisserie chicken, it's taxed, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Finance Minister forcing families to pay PST on basic groceries like hot rotisserie chickens?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, in going back to decisions that were made 6 years ago, Mr. Speaker, it's a bit of a stretch that they have found, and yes, there are some odd foods that are on the list that the federal government has. The majority of foods are chips, chocolate bars, candies. They are like genuinely what we would think of as snack food. However, to save confusion with the retailers, we use the same criteria so that there is no question as to what the PST qualifies and what doesn't. What I do find interesting, and if anyone has time to go through Hansard of committee where my budget was scrutinized by that member opposite, you will find that the members opposite, in all of their asks of additional spending, it adds up to $1.5 billion, Mr. Speaker. Heaven help us if they are ever in charge of the finances of this province.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, so nickel and diming people on their groceries, some of the hardest workers, is the answer? You've got to be kidding me, Mr. Speaker. The list of groceries captured by the Sask Party's PST goes on and on. Granola bars, shrimp rings, cold cut trays, fruit salads and salads. It makes no sense. Families trying to put food on the table and pack lunches for their kids shouldn't be forced to pay more. You know, the pompous member from Meadow Lake, Mr. Speaker, wants to heckle, but there's hard-working families trying to put food on the table and put lunches together for their kids. And the price of food just keeps going up and up. So does the revenue from that Sask Party's decision to raise the PST here, to impose it. Why won't the minister give families a break and cancel the costly PST on the food that families use as staples for lunches and meals?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'll say one thing. When the NDP had a chance to govern, they didn't nickel and dime. They majorly gouged. Mr. Speaker, today, a family of four earning $75,000 income pays $1,891 in provincial income tax. Mr. Speaker, do you know what that same family is paying in income tax when the NDP were in power? $5,015, Mr. Speaker. Same family, same income, over $5,000 under an NDP government, and it's less than $2,000 today. That's a savings of over $3,000 for that very same family, not just this year, every single year, and it's indexed, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
We're going to talk about predecessors. Their predecessors bankrupted the province, Mr. Speaker, and that government imposed the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history. Mr. Speaker, Speaker, families aren't the only ones cutting back as a result of inflation. Manufacturers and food processors are cutting back too. Smaller packaging means that items that used to be exempt from PST and GST no longer qualify and now count as so-called snacks. So if you're buying a box of 6 granola bars, no tax. 5 or less, Mr. Speaker, the tax applies. The same for muffins. The story goes on. Why does this tired and out-of-touch government think it's fair for families to pay more in PST just because they're buying food in smaller sizes?
Here, here, here. Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to just share, because, you know, there was a member statement earlier of how some of their members say one thing and other members have something else to say. So I have a quote from the member from Regina University. And what did the member from Regina University say, Mr. Speaker? And I quote, "Taxes aren't leading to an income insecurity, so instead of giving me a $850 tax cut, I'd rather contribute another $850. So does that member support his colleague from Regina University?
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
My colleague from University and this entire caucus and that leader has stood up against the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history by that government. They're proving how out of touch they are, Mr. Speaker. People are working longer hours but taking home fewer dollars. They have to budget their time and their money. They're often prepping a family meal and eating quick between shifts or between activities, and then arriving late to prep that meal for the next day, starting all over again. But if they take a rotisserie chicken and a bag of lettuce, this government thinks they should be penalized with taxes. It's an unfair tax. When will this government start listening to people and scrap this unfair tax on the staples for lunches and meals for families across Saskatchewan?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
The member opposite is well aware the vast majority of groceries are tax-free, Mr. Speaker. He knows that. He absolutely knows that. And he knows that there is a number of choices that anyone has in any given grocery store. He knows that as well. But does he know that when you start to add up all of the things that the NDP think we should spend more money on or forego the revenue of, that it adds up to way more than $1.5 billion? Does he know that with all of their asks added together, we would be in a deficit position, Mr. Speaker? We would be paying higher interest, and we would never see the light of day financially. Is he aware of that?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Speaker, people can make choices in the grocery store. You want to talk about choices? Let's talk about the government that's tripled the provincial debt.
Hear, hear.
Because it's not just the cost of groceries that people are struggling with, Mr. Speaker. People's power bills are ballooning. Even if they've managed to get food on the table, they're having trouble keeping the lights on. 52% of people in the province are struggling to pay their bills. They can't afford to pay them. So, Mr. Speaker, can the minister, in a province sitting on billions of windfall revenue, explain why more than half of people can't afford to pay their bills?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Crown's Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to listen to some of the comments made by the members opposite about a matter that was debated before the last election. I thought maybe they're going to be complaining next about the high cost of fax paper or phone booths or something. And Mr. Speaker, the reality of it is the issue of affordability is something that our government takes seriously, Mr. Speaker. We know that this is something that affects the citizens in our province. And, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite have no credibility on this issue. Mr. Speaker, the cost of the carbon tax is now in our province 76% as much as the actual cost of the goods that are being consumed. Mr. Speaker, if the members opposite are serious and sincere about wanting to do something, they ought to contact their leader, their co-leader, Jagmeet Singh, and do something about the carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, we are in a province that's highly dependent on fossil fuel. They can do something about it.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've been dead clear on the carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. We do not support the carbon tax. What we do support is people being able to afford to put food on the table. Right. This is serious, Mr. Speaker. Right. And we know this is a government that's tired, that's out of touch, that's not listening, but we also know that they can be begged, bullied, or shamed into doing the right thing, whether it's Colin Thatcher or a new compensation model for physicians. So people are begging for help, Mr. Speaker. Why aren't they listening? They act like they cannot hear people in the province saying, we can't afford to pay our bills. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask again, when will the minister start listening to people, take it seriously, and scrap the SaskPower rate hike?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, I don't think, are genuinely sincere about this. On September 13th, the new leader of the opposition was quoted as saying that in an affordability crisis, we have some of the best rates as a province. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be careful and we will monitor things that are taking place in the province. When we formed government, Mr. Speaker, we changed the tax laws so that 112,000 people were taken off the tax rolls completely. Those people do not pay any money in tax whatsoever. Mr. Speaker, the member for Regina University talks about lower power rates, but during the pandemic she called our 10% power rebate a handout for business. That doesn't seem like good public policy. Mr. Speaker, those members opposite have no credibility in this issue. They've got a long ways to go. They point to natural gas programs in Alberta and Manitoba as an affordability measure. Mr. Speaker, we're already lower than either Alberta and Manitoba on natural gas. We're not going to follow their lead because it would actually mean a rate increase.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the minister can take a break from faxing himself Oppo research and remember that he has raised power rates not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times in just a few months. Because even this tired and out-of-touch government can't possibly believe that people will accept that they're sitting on billions of dollars and still needed to raise their power rates 4 times in just a few months. And now, Mr. Speaker, 52% of people cannot afford their bills here in Saskatchewan right now. When is that tired and out-of-touch minister going to take this seriously and scrap the SaskPower rate hikes?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the members opposite to look at the cost of the total utility bundle. The average Saskatchewan family pays over less than $700 less than a family in British Columbia, $1,300 less than a family in Quebec, $3,700 less than a family in Ontario, over $4,000 less than a family in Alberta, and over $5,500 less than a family in Newfoundland. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 years, SGI has issued 2 rounds of rebate checks to vehicle owners, averaging $480 per vehicle and returning a total of $370 million to the people in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to deal with affordability in the province. We will continue to give rebates where appropriate. We will continue to watch carefully. But I'd urge the members opposite, take some time, contact Jagmeet Singh and ask them to do something about the high carbon tax rate that they have imposed and are continuing to look and support increases in that carbon tax, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from the Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this government has simply failed to help Saskatchewan people in their time of need. They've mishandled the cost of living crisis that has impacted essentials worst of all: food, utilities, housing. And this regressive, arbitrary Sask Party food tax is just another example of an approach that hits working and struggling families hardest. Right. No wonder food bank use is skyrocketing and the homelessness crisis is out of control. Insult to injury, low-income families that need to cover skyrocketing utilities and food prices just like everyone else got an extra $1 a day. The same living amount if they have 2, 4, 6 kids. A 2% increase for folks on the SED program. No wonder it was called a slap in the face. Why isn't the minister doing more to help low-income people in this crisis? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Mr. Speaker. This government understands the challenges that are out there. That's why this past fall we came up with the affordability tax credit. Every person in Saskatchewan over 18 got a $500 and $500 tax credit, and on top of that, Mr. Speaker, that was exempted by this government. The members opposite came forward with $105 per individual, Mr. Speaker. In terms of income assistance, it's a $620 million budget this year, Mr. Speaker, and to correct the member once again, there on the Citizens Head program, there was a 6% increase, Mr. Speaker, on those two programs. Those are some of the highest rates in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to work with the sector, Mr. Speaker, but we've made significant increases and investments in those folks that are most vulnerable in our province. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from the John Alvin Stone Centre.
Speaker, this same government that raised power bills 4 times in the matter of months didn't increase support for low-income people for almost a decade. Meanwhile, people are paying more for all of their essentials. The housing picture isn't much worse. We have 3,000 vacant units across the province, a 20% vacancy rate, while homelessness is higher than it's ever been. The wait list is long, and the people living out on the street is high. They can't afford food. They can't afford power. They can't afford housing. No support from this government, just cuts and more taxes. Does the minister really think $30 is enough, or was it his intention to simply slap people in the face? How is this Sask government failing to deliver on the very basics of life, from putting food on the table to a roof over people's heads?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we can hear the desperation coming from the members opposite when they misrepresent facts over and over, every time, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the SED program, Mr. Speaker, there is a $30 increase on the basic benefit, Mr. Speaker. Actual pay is about $40 on average per person, Mr. Speaker. There's exemptions within the SED program for those that are able to work, as well as new on the CIS program. Mr. Speaker, this is part of $620 million we are investing this year in income assistance, Mr. Speaker, some of the highest rates in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We take a whole of income approach. There's not just the provincial contribution, Mr. Speaker, there's the federal contribution. So, Mr. Speaker, for example, one single adult with 2 dependent children, they'll get $2,771. That increases as the more children you have, contrary to what the member said.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon, Newtown.
Mr. Speaker, the Coroner's Service has released the latest overdose death statistics for this province. We've lost 186 people to drug overdoses this year. Not in the last 12 months, but since January. 186 is more than we lost in all of 2019 and every year before that. Some of them live in my constituency, and some of them may just as easily lived in yours. Overdose numbers in this province are spiraling, and we have yet to see meaningful action from that minister or cabinet. When is the minister going to recognize the crisis proportions of this calamity and take real concerted action to decrease the number of deaths by drug overdose?
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government takes this issue very seriously. We're making a number of significant investments into prevention, into harm reduction, into long-term treatment and recovery. Mr. Speaker, this government has talked about and is working on adding at least 150 more treatment spaces in this province. Just so far this spring, we've announced 62 spaces, with more to come as the rest of the phases of that treatment and recovery bed and space expansion continue throughout the coming weeks and months ahead. Mr. Speaker, last week, this government announced, as part of our harm reduction initiatives, alongside the treatments of the pathway to treatment and recovery, the addition of spectrometer machines being now utilized at Prairie Harm Reduction in Saskatoon and the Neo-Yatina Friendship Centre in Regina, Mr. Speaker, to support those harm reduction efforts. Again, Mr. Speaker, in conjunction with the long-term plan for treatment and recovery, making sure that's available for people in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to go first. To the member from Regina Rosemont, you used the words referring to the Minister of Trade and Export Development. The pompous member from Meadow Lake, two things wrong: unparliamentary language and not referring to the member by the proper title. I ask you to stand and withdraw and apologize.
I withdraw and apologize.
Okay, does that cover it? I recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, during the Minister for Social Services response in his questions in question period today, he accused members on this side of misrepresenting facts. You've already ruled that that phrase is unparliamentary. I ask that you ask him to apologize and withdraw.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
I believe for the first time, I withdraw and apologize.
Ministerial statements, introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees. I recognize the Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on House Services.
Mr. Speaker, I have been instructed by the Standing Committee on House Services to report that it has considered certain estimates and to present its 12th report, which includes the 2023-24 estimates. I move that the 12th report of the Standing Committee on House Services be now concurred in.
It has been moved by the Deputy Chair that the 12th report of the Standing Committee on House Services be now concurred in. Is Assembly ready for the question? The pledge of Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to present its third report, which reflects the work of the committee for the period May 18, 2022 to May 9, 2023. I want to thank all the committee members, the committee clerks, and very importantly, the provincial auditor and her team, and all audit entities, ministries, and government reporting entities. I move the third report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be now concurred in.
It has been moved by the Chair that the third report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be now concurred in. Is the Assembly ready for the question? It's the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies to report Bill number 94, the Public Pension and Benefits Administration Corporation Act with amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister of Finance.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill, and that the bill and its amendments be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill Number 94, the Public Pension Benefits Administration Corporation Act, that the bill and its amendments be now read the third time. Is leave granted? When shall amendments be read a first time?
Amendments be now read a first and second time.
It has been moved by the Minister that amendments be now read a first and second time. It is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
First and second reading of the amendments.
The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
Move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved by the Minister that Bill Number 94, the Public Pension and Benefits Administration Corporation Act, be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? It's the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Third reading. I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies to report Bill Number 122, the Saskatchewan Revenue Agency Act, without amendment.
Will be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read a third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill Number 122, the Saskatchewan Revenue Agency Act, and that the bill be now read the third time. Is leave granted? The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved by the Minister that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title. Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Those in favour of the motion, please say yea. Yea. Those opposed to the motion say no. No. Call in the members. All those in favour of the motion, please stand.
Mr. Moe.
Yes.
Mr. McMorris.
Yes.
Mr. Ryder.
Yes.
Mr. Merriman.
Yes.
Ms. Harper.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Ms. Tell.
Yes.
Mr. Wyand.
Yes.
Mr. Mikowski.
Yes.
Mr. Merritt.
Yes.
Mr. Cheveldayoff.
Yes.
Mr. Bradshaw.
Yes.
Mr. Kading.
Yes.
Mr. Cockrell.
Yes.
Ms. Eyre.
Yes.
Mr. Harrison Meadow Lake.
Yes.
Ms. Carr.
Yes.
Mr. Hinley.
Yes.
Mr. Buckingham.
Yes.
Mr. Hargrave.
Yes.
Mr. Fayez.
Yes.
Ms. Lambert.
Yes.
Mr. Dennis.
Yes.
Mr. Kirsch.
Yes.
Ms. Ross, PA Northcote.
Yes.
Mr. Ottenbright.
Yes.
Mr. Francis.
Yes.
Ms. Young, Lloydminster.
Yes.
Among your favorite.
Mr. Steele.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Bonk.
Yes.
Mr. McLeod.
Yes.
Mr. Friesen.
Yes.
Mr. Greywall.
Yes.
Mr. Nalin.
Yes.
Mr. Gowdy.
Yes.
Mr. Keesig.
Yes.
Mr. Lemeg.
Yes.
Mr. Jensen.
Yes.
Mr. Harrison Cannington.
Yes.
Mr. Domitar.
Yes.
Ms. Wilson.
And Ms. Wilson.
Yes.
All those opposed, please stand.
43.
Ms. Beck.
No.
Ms. Mowat.
No.
Mr. Weatherspoon.
No.
Mr. Love.
No.
Mr. Teed.
No.
Ms. Young, Regina University.
No.
Ms. Sarr.
No. Terry.
Ms. Conway.
No.
Ms. Bowes.
No.
Ms. Ritchie.
No. 10. Yep.
Mr. Speaker, those in favor of the motion, 43. Those against the motion, 10.
I declare the motion carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Third reading. I recognize the chair of the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies to report Bill number 133, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2023, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister of Finance.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 133, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2023, and that the bill be now read the third time. Is leave granted? Minister may proceed to move third reading.
I move that the bill be now read a third time and passed under its title.
It has been moved by the Minister the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is Assembly ready for the question? The pledge of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Third reading. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to facilitate the work of committee this afternoon and this evening, I move that this House do now adjourn.
Ministers move to adjourn the House is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned till 1:30 tomorrow.